Damascus, Syria, 1st century AD. The city never slept quietly. Even in the deep blue of dawn, the scent of stone dust and olive wood clung to the air. From the rooftop of his father's workshop, a boy watched the rising sun gild the city's temples and arches. He was no more than 12, yet already his fingers bore the calluses of work, his eyes the brightness of ambition. His name was Apollodorus. "Why do you stare at the stars, boy?" asked his father, Dion, one evening, as the boy sketched strange angles into the clay dust beside a lamp flame. "Because they move in patterns, and patterns hold truth," Apollodorus replied, never lifting his gaze. "Just like domes. Just like bridges." Dion chuckled, stroking his beard. "And will you build with stars, then?" "With stone," the boy whispered. "But guided by what's above." In Damascus, Apollodorus apprenticed not just under his father, a modest stonemason, but among Greek mathematicians, Roman engineers, and Arab astronomers. He learned to blend worlds, function and form, east and west, earth and sky. His nights were spent under the stars, but his days were buried in sweat, measuring arches and carving marble. He read Vitruvius, memorizing every line. And he asked questions. Too many questions. Why does the arch bear more weight than the post and lintel? What if a dome could float, not rest on four walls? Why must beauty follow rules? What if the rules followed beauty? He was clever. Too clever for Damascus. By his early 20s, word of his brilliance had spread to Antioch and Alexandria. He was summoned to consult on aqueduct repairs, colonnades, and even a failed amphitheater design. His work was meticulous, but never timid. Apollodorus of Damascus, a Roman official once muttered in a forum corridor. Not just an architect. A question wrapped in stone. That reputation followed him, along roads, over rivers, across seas. And then, one day, a letter arrived. Red wax seal. Imperial. Summons to Rome. The boy from Damascus was about to walk into the very heart of the empire. Rome, 96 AD. The first thing Apollodorus noticed was the sound. Not the sound of clashing swords or roaring crowds, but the stone, chiseled, hauled, placed, and polished. Rome was alive, and it breathed through marble and brick. The streets trembled beneath carts pulled by oxen, echoing against colonnades and temple steps. Rome was a city of motion, disciplined chaos, crafted to endure. Apollodorus stepped off the gangplank of his ship, clutching a worn scroll and a rolled sketch of a new kind of arch. He looked around, not with awe, but with careful curiosity. "So this is it," he muttered, more to himself than to the sailor beside him. The world Rome built. The forum buzzed with activity. Senators in purple-bordered togas, slaves in chains, scribes with wax tablets, and laborers hauling stones to repair a temple front. But even amid that noise, Apollodorus felt something else, a void. Rome had the size of greatness, but its buildings? Functional, yes. Grand, sometimes. But they lacked poetry. He saw arches that buckled under their own ambition. Colonnades that seemed arranged more by habit than vision. Buildings that dominated, but did not breathe. He was shown to a guest house near the Campus Martius. A junior architect from the imperial office came to greet him, a lean Roman named Lucius, with sharp eyes and a tone too smooth to trust. "You're the man from Syria?" Lucius said, eyeing him as one would a new tool. "I'm Apollodorus." "Right. You're here on recommendation from Proconsul Gaius of Antioch. He says you fixed a collapsing amphitheater in 3 days." "2," Apollodorus corrected. Lucius smirked. "Bold. The emperor likes bold." "At least Trajan does," Apollodorus replied, reading the man's tone carefully. Lucius's expression flickered. "Yes. Trajan." Rome was buzzing with a secret then. Emperor Nerva, old and childless, was nearing the end of his rule. Whispers circled, his heir would be Trajan, a general from Hispania, a soldier's emperor. One who respected discipline, clarity, and results. Exactly the kind of man who might appreciate a bold, uncompromising architect. That night, Apollodorus walked alone through the ruins of the old Forum of Augustus. Moonlight spilled over cracked paving stones and headless statues. He crouched beside a fallen pillar, ran his hand over the fluting, and whispered, "You tried. But Rome can be more." In the distance, the Capitoline temples rose like watchful gods, their torches flickering in the wind. He was ready to show Rome something new. Rome, 98 AD. Winter had just begun when the old Emperor Nerva died. No great funeral procession. No riots. Rome had learned to absorb change as if it were part of its foundation. But behind closed doors, in villas and palaces, in barracks and senate halls, everything shifted. Trajan was now emperor, declared so by the Senate, acclaimed by the legions. In truth, he had already been governing in practice. The army trusted him. The provinces loved him. And in Rome itself, a quiet anticipation hummed through the marble halls. He would build. Not for vanity, but for utility, for glory, for permanence. Apollodorus had been working quietly during those uncertain months. Designing minor arches for provincial delegations. Consulting on the renovation of a dilapidated bathhouse. But he was waiting. Then, one morning, Lucius returned to his quarters, a scroll in his hand and sweat on his brow. "The emperor wants to see you," he said. Apollodorus was silent for a moment. Then, softly, "Good." The Alla Regia of the Palatine Hill was not as grand as it looked from the outside. Inside, it was cold, its mosaics faded and its pillars chipped. But Trajan did not care for luxury. He sat simply on a carved wooden chair, no purple robes, no gold ornaments. Just a general in command of the greatest empire in the world. "You're the one from Syria," Trajan said, without preamble. "I am," Apollodorus replied. "You built the bridge at Antioch." "Yes. When the foundations cracked, I reinforced them with alternating courses of tuff and basalt. The flood passed without damage." "Good," Trajan said. "I don't like things that crack." He leaned forward, studying the architect's face. "Rome must grow. Not just outward, but upward. I want a forum. Not like Augustus's. Better. Larger. Something eternal." Apollodorus bowed slightly. "Then we must move the earth." Trajan smiled faintly. "So I've been told." He handed over a scroll. "Start with this land. But you'll need to remove the saddle between the Capitoline and Quirinal hills." Apollodorus took the scroll and nodded slowly. "Then I will remove it." The emperor stood. "And when it is done, we will build something that speaks. Not just of conquest, but of memory." That night, Apollodorus returned to his quarters and unrolled the parchment. His mind swirled with stone, geometry, sunlight angles, pedestrian flow. He began sketching, with careful precision, what would become the Forum of Trajan, the largest and most complex civic space Rome would ever know. And he wrote one word at the top. Eternitas. Eternity. Rome, 100 AD. It began with silence. Then came the iron picks, the clatter of chisels, the grunt of slaves and freedmen. Birds fled from the trees as thousands of men descended upon the saddle of earth that lay between the Capitoline and Quirinal hills. Rome had stood on those hills for centuries. But now, Apollodorus of Damascus had orders to carve a valley where none had ever been. To do that, he would remove millions of cubic feet of stone by hand, no gunpowder, no cranes, just men, ropes, sweat, and mathematics. He stood on a scaffolding above the site, arms crossed, watching. Lucius climbed up beside him. "This is mad," he said, surveying the enormity of it. "You're cutting through Rome's spine." "It's not mad," Apollodorus replied. "It's necessary. The old forum spaces are too cramped. Augustus's is walled in. Caesar's chokes at midday. This," he pointed to the dust and chaos below, "this will breathe." "How long?" "For years, maybe 5. Lucius shook his head. "The Senate won't like the cost." Apollodorus gave a thin smile. "They can carve the hill themselves if they object." And so it began. Every day, 3,000 laborers chipped away at the living rock. Debris was carted away through the Porta Collina, dumped into pits beyond the city walls. Apollodorus supervised every hour. When they hit a pocket of unstable clay, he designed buttressing walls. When water seeped from an underground spring, he had it redirected into a new branch of the Aqua Virgo. "Never trust the ground beneath you," he told his engineers. "It remembers things." At night, he returned to his chamber and revised the master plan. A massive forum flanked by basilicas, statues, libraries, and at the heart, an idea that had only just begun to take shape in his mind. A column. Not just a monument. A scroll in stone. One that would wind upward, a spiral narrative carved from marble, telling the entire story of Trajan's conquest in Dacia, a visual epic for the people of Rome. One evening, Trajan himself rode out to the site, dismounting near the edge of the rising excavations. Apollodorus met him without ceremony. "You're moving a hill," Trajan said, marveling. Apollodorus shrugged. "Yes. But it's what we put in its place that will matter." The emperor smiled. "I trust you. Don't let me down." He wouldn't. Rome, 103 AD. The ground was flat now. Where once stood a saddle of ancient hills, there now stretched a vast, open construction site, the air thick with lime dust and sun. The Roman people had never seen such ambition. Visitors to the city would climb the Capitoline to glimpse the growing colossus. The future forum of Trajan, and whisper that even the gods must be watching. Apollodorus walked the site with a slate in hand, his eyes sharp, never still. Everywhere he looked, he saw not dust and stone, but potential. His mind was always 10 steps ahead, envisioning not just buildings, but light, movement, sound. "Shift the eastern colonnade by half a foot," he told a foreman, barely glancing up. "The midday sun strikes it too harshly, guests will feel the heat." And the paving stones? They slope too subtly toward the drainage. In winter, water will collect. Fix it. The man nodded and ran off, shouting orders. Thousands worked here now, stonecutters, masons, engineers, sculptors, slaves, apprentices. The clink of chisels and the shouts of foremen echoed like military drills. Every morning began with a ritual of discipline, tools inspected, measurements checked, injuries logged. It was, in a sense, a campaign of architecture. Apollodorus insisted on high standards. He walked among the laborers, asked questions, sometimes demonstrated a technique himself. One afternoon, a Greek sculptor named Nestor approached him with a piece of a cornice, delicately carved acanthus leaves, nearly perfect. "Too perfect," Apollodorus said, examining it. "It needs tension. The leaves must seem like they're struggling toward the light, not lounging in it." Nestor blinked. "But symmetry is beauty." "Not always," Apollodorus said. "Life isn't symmetrical. Neither is Rome." That was his philosophy: motion, not stillness. Breath, not stasis. Every arch must feel like it could move. Every column must carry not just weight, but intention. Meanwhile, the 2 library halls, one Greek, one Latin, rose along the northern edge. Opposite, the Grand Basilica Ulpia began to take shape, a vast civic hall to dwarf all others, with double aisles and clerestory windows high above. Light streamed in like a divine judgment. Trajan visited weekly now. "Are we on schedule?" he asked one day. "We're ahead," Apollodorus said simply. "By 2 weeks. You command this place like a general," Trajan said. "I was trained to build as the army fights, with precision and force." The emperor clasped his shoulder. "Good. We don't just conquer Dacia with swords. We conquer it again, here, in marble." As the basilica's pillars rose and the libraries took form, Apollodorus turned at last to the space at the center of it all, where a column would soon rise. He had the marble quarried already, Carrara stone, flawless and white. Each drum would weigh over 30 tons, and the frieze, over 600 feet in length, would be carved into it, coiling upward like the smoke of a sacred fire. But that work would come later. For now, the dust still settled, and the city watched with bated breath as Rome prepared to outdo itself. Rome, 106 AD. It stood in the center of the forum like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. A circular foundation of stone, marked out with tight precision by Apollodorus's own hand. Visitors passed it daily, unaware of what was to come. But he knew. It would be unlike anything Rome had ever seen. A column, yes. But not simply to bear weight, not a marker of triumph in the usual sense. This one would speak. It would tell a story. Trajan had returned from the Dacian wars victorious. His soldiers marched through the streets with their armor blood-stained and dented, dragging carts of spoils and gold, and behind them, rows of captured prisoners. The Senate celebrated. The people roared. But Apollodorus asked a question no one else dared. How will they remember this in 100 years? In 1,000? He brought the answer to the emperor himself. "This," Apollodorus said, laying out a scroll, "is a scroll of stone. Spiraling upward. A narrative frieze, not just names or battles, but the entire campaign, from preparation to victory. Over 200 meters of carved relief. It will be read as one walks around it. Not written in ink, but in shadow and depth." Trajan studied the drawing. "So each scene is alive?" "Yes. Soldiers building forts. Diplomats in council. The river Danube bridged by pontoons. Even you, giving speeches. Every moment." "And the height?" 35 meters, Apollodorus said. "Including the pedestal. It will rise above the basilica rooftops. It will stand like a watchtower over memory itself." Trajan was silent a moment. "And inside?" "A staircase. Hollow within. Light shafts cut to guide the way." The emperor nodded. "Build it." Work began at once. The marble drums, massive, white, and flawless, arrived from the Carrara quarries by ship and wagon. Each piece was hoisted by winches and pulleys, coated in beeswax to reduce friction, and rotated slowly into place. The scaffolding reached dozens of meters into the sky, and the noise of chisels echoed across the entire forum. The carving was entrusted to a team of highly skilled sculptors, led by Nestor, the Greek artist Apollodorus had handpicked. "This is not relief," Apollodorus told him. "This is cinema." Nestor nodded slowly, his fingers already tracing the first outlines into the wax mock-ups. "Then let it begin with silence, and rise to the roar." They began from the base, Roman soldiers crossing the Danube on a pontoon bridge. Then, camps being built, trees felled, ambassadors met. Over the weeks, the column's epic unfurled upward, over 2,500 individual figures in hundreds of scenes. Apollodorus insisted on accuracy. He had veterans from the war recount events. He reviewed military maps, troop deployments, and armor designs. If a soldier's greave was wrong, he had it redone. If a tense rope lacked tension, it was carved again. "This is not a story for us," he said to Nestor one day. It's for those who come long after we are dust. Trajan visited often, fascinated. And when I die? He asked once, half smiling. Will you carve my funeral too? Apollodorus met his gaze. I will place your ashes at the center. Inside the pedestal, surrounded by your deeds. The emperor said nothing. But his eyes, hardened by war, sharpened by command, gleamed just a little. Rome, 108 AD. The Forum of Trajan was nearly complete. The Basilica Ulpia stood proud, its vast nave echoing with footsteps and business. The libraries flanked the rising column, their scrolls already filling cedar shelves. A grand equestrian statue of the emperor was planned for the central courtyard, bronze cast to gleam even in dusk. It was the jewel of the empire, its glory visible from every quarter of Rome. But with glory comes envy. Apollodorus had become a figure of renown. His name was spoken with admiration by senators and craftsmen alike. Foreign dignitaries requested his audience. His sketches were sought, copied, stolen. Some whispered he was more than an architect. More than a builder. A visionary. And visionaries are dangerous. One man who watched him closely, and not fondly, was Publius Aelius Hadrian, Trajan's cousin, rising star of the imperial court. A man of taste, intellect, and ambition. He walked the forum often, praising the work in clipped phrases, but always with a polite smile that never touched his eyes. Your column, Hadrian said once, watching sculptors at work, is ingenious. But does it not dwarf everything else? It is meant to, Apollodorus replied. You think scale is the measure of greatness? No, Apollodorus said, pausing. Clarity is. But scale helps. Hadrian gave a thin smile. Clarity can also be blinding. That was the beginning. Whispers reached Apollodorus's ears, rumors that Hadrian had criticized the proportions of the basilica, or suggested that a domed temple might have been more Roman than the libraries he'd built. The two men stood on opposite ends of philosophy. Apollodorus, severe and practical, believed in function bound to form. Hadrian, a lover of Greek symmetry and mysticism, dreamed in marble curves and sacred ratios. Still, Trajan remained loyal. You've given me an empire in stone, the emperor told Apollodorus as they stood atop the scaffolding of the column one evening. From that height, the whole forum stretched before them, ordered, balanced, eternal. It's not mine, Apollodorus said. It's yours. I only revealed it. Trajan clapped his shoulder. When I die, this will be what I leave behind. More than Dacia. More than gold. They stood in silence, the wind shifting their cloaks. Down below, fire pits glowed as workers continued into the night. The city murmured like a sleeping beast. But change was coming. The emperor had aged. His gait had slowed. And all knew his death was not far off. Apollodorus, too, felt it, like ash on his tongue. He doubled his efforts. Oversaw the final carving of the frieze. Approved the hidden staircase's last stones. Inscribed the dedicatory plaque, to the Emperor Caesar Nerva Trianus Augustus, conqueror of the Dacians. And in the hollow base of the column, beneath the lowest step, he placed a sealed bronze urn. Trajan's ashes would one day rest there. Not in a palace. Not in a tomb. But in memory, carved upward toward the gods. Selinus, Cilicia, August 117 AD. The sea lapped gently at the cliffs below the imperial villa. The air was thick, too still for a Roman summer. Inside, servants moved with hushed feet and downcast eyes. Physicians whispered in corners. Curtains were drawn. The emperor lay dying. Trajan, conqueror of Dacia, builder of the greatest forum Rome had ever seen, was struck down not by war, but by illness. Some claimed it was a stroke. Others said his heart failed. But the result was the same, the old general was fading. Apollodorus arrived too late. He had ridden hard from Rome across the provinces, called to attend a final council. But by the time he reached Selinus, Trajan was already unconscious, his breath shallow and rattling in the dim room. Lucius, now older, grayer, met him at the threshold. "He hasn't spoken in days," he said quietly. "They say the succession is sealed. Hadrian has the army's favor." Apollodorus said nothing. He entered the room alone. Trajan's once powerful frame now lay sunken beneath linen. The man who had walked the Danube with fire in his veins now seemed barely mortal. Apollodorus stood beside the bed. After a long silence, he whispered, "I have finished it. The forum is complete. The column rises above the rooftops. Your ashes will rest at its heart, as we planned." The emperor's eyes fluttered. One breath. Then another. No answer came. Apollodorus bowed low. When he rose again, Trajan was dead. Rome, weeks later. The funeral was immense. His body, embalmed and wrapped in purple, was brought back to Rome in state. Crowds lined the streets. The Senate wept with ceremony. Veterans of the Dacian wars marched in worn armor. Priests burned offerings at every shrine. Apollodorus stood beside the column as the imperial ashes were sealed within the base. The forum was draped in black banners and purple cloth. And yet, even in mourning, it stood triumphant. The structures caught the sunlight like living memory. In the distance, Hadrian watched from his private carriage. His face unreadable. Within a week, he was declared Imperator Caesar Traianus Hadrianus Augustus. The city murmured with uncertainty. Some rejoiced, others bristled. Apollodorus received no invitation to the first imperial banquet. Nor to the next. Still, he continued his work. There were projects in Syria to oversee. An aqueduct in Hispania needing final designs. He remained loyal to the memory of Trajan. But the court had changed. One day, a letter arrived at his villa. Brief. Cold. Your presence is no longer required at the imperial court. Your services have been appreciated. The emperor wishes you peace in retirement. There was no signature. Only the seal of Hadrian. Lucius read it 3 times. "He's dismissing you?" he asked in disbelief. Apollodorus folded the scroll. "He fears what I built. Because it was not his." Lucius slammed the table. "You gave this city its soul." But Apollodorus only shook his head. "I gave it a mirror," he said quietly. "Some men hate their reflection." Antioch, 119 AD. The road from Rome to Antioch was long, but Apollodorus did not travel it in shame. He rode under the Mediterranean sun, past marble cities and dusty roads lined with olive trees. As the capital receded behind him, he felt not loss, but clarity. The weight of imperial politics fell away, and with it, the dull roar of Rome's courtly games. What remained was the work, always the work. In Antioch, he found welcome. The eastern provinces had heard of him, the man who had raised the greatest forum in Rome, who had carved memory into marble. The city's council offered him lodging, and soon, commissions. Aqueduct repairs. A proposed amphitheater. Temples needing reinforcement against the tremors that sometimes shook the region. He set about his duties with quiet focus. But even here, the shadow of Hadrian followed. Rumors reached him. The new emperor was building vast structures across the empire. Temples in Athens. A villa outside Rome, enormous and personal, unlike anything before. Hadrian's Villa, they called it. Full of domes and curves and artificial lakes, more dream than city. And then, whispers. That Hadrian had adapted some of Apollodorus's own earlier sketches. That he had taken them, altered them, and claimed the vision as his own. It was Lucius who said aloud what others dared not. "He envies you," he said one night over a dim oil lamp. "He fears your ghost in every column he raises." Apollodorus looked up from his parchment. "Then let him. A shadow cast long still shows where the sun once stood." He did not seek to return. He did not write to the court. He poured his soul into teaching, mentoring a new generation of engineers and architects. Men came from Syria, from Cappadocia, even from Egypt, to learn from him. He taught them the secrets of Roman concrete, of buttressed arches, of how to balance a column not only in mass, but in emotion. He spoke often of Rome, but more often of purpose. "You do not build to please emperors," he told them. "You build to last beyond them." One day, a visitor came. A messenger. Imperial robes. He brought a sealed scroll with the emperor's seal. Apollodorus accepted it with steady hands. "The emperor requests your presence at court. There are architectural disputes that require resolution. Your experience is valued." Lucius frowned. "It's a trap." "Or a test," Apollodorus said. "Why go? You owe him nothing." Apollodorus folded the scroll. "That's why I can go without fear." He left Antioch days later. Toward Athens, where Hadrian now held court. Toward whatever fate Rome's new master had prepared. Athens, 121 AD. The city of Athena gleamed in the sunlight as Apollodorus arrived. The Acropolis crowned the hill like a diadem, and below, the streets thrived with merchants, philosophers, and masons, all whispering of the emperor. Hadrian had made Athens his second capital. He walked in Greek sandals, read from Sophocles, quoted Plato, and even wore the short-cloaked garb of a philosopher when he pleased. But behind the cultural reverence was the same imperial will, a will that brooked no challenge. Apollodorus was brought to the library of Hadrian, still under construction. The courtyards were lined with half-carved columns and workmen shouting in several languages. A giant reflecting pool stretched before the colonnades, its marble edging still raw. At the far end of the site stood the emperor, surrounded by his circle, scholars, architects, eunuchs, guards. Hadrian turned when Apollodorus approached. "Rome's ghost returns," he said. "I wonder, did the East give you peace?" Apollodorus bowed. "It gave me clarity." Hadrian's eyes flickered. "You see, gentlemen," he said to his entourage. "A man of marble always speaks in riddles." Apollodorus stood tall, unfazed. "You summoned me. Speak plainly." Hadrian stepped closer. "We're building the temple of Olympian Zeus. The scale is problematic. Columns shift in winter ground, and our dome prototype collapses in trial models. The engineers are hesitant." Apollodorus studied the site drawings laid out on a marble slab. They were impressive, ambitious even, but flawed. Too much mass at the corners, too little weight distribution through the arches. A fatal misunderstanding of Roman concrete. "This won't hold," Apollodorus said. A hush fell over the circle. Hadrian's voice was low, sharp. "You contradict an emperor." "I contradict a mistake," Apollodorus replied. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Hadrian smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You always did prefer truth to tact." "I serve the work," Apollodorus said. "Not flattery." The circle dispersed uneasily. That evening, Apollodorus was not invited to dine at the imperial table. He was lodged in a marble chamber, well kept, but watched. Every servant kept glancing at the shadows. Even Lucius, still with him, warned in hushed tones. "This man will not forgive you." Apollodorus shrugged. "He has nothing to forgive." He asked for counsel. I gave it. Lucius paced. He wanted praise. Apollodorus's voice was firm. Then he should have hired a bard, not an engineer. Over the next weeks, he remained in Athens, reviewing projects, advising younger builders, and inspecting stonework. Word spread of his honest criticism, of his refusal to praise domes that sagged or mosaics that cracked under heat. Hadrian, humiliated, grew colder. He spoke less of Apollodorus but thought of him often. He has no crown, the emperor muttered one night, staring into his courtyard. But people follow him. They remember his name. In jealousy, Hadrian sought to erase him not with words, but with silence. A quiet decree was issued: Apollodorus would return to Rome, escorted, with honors. No trial. No punishment. Just a journey. Rome, late 122 AD. The road home was lined with memories. As Apollodorus approached the city, he passed the very aqueducts he had helped maintain in his youth, their arches striding like stone sentinels across the hills. The olive groves had aged, as he had. But the Forum still glimmered in the afternoon light, and from afar, the column of Trajan rose into view, its spiral carving catching the sun like a living flame. He stood before it in silence. Beneath its base, behind a sealed marble panel, rested the ashes of Trajan, the last true emperor he had served. Apollodorus touched the stone lightly. Still watching, he whispered. But Rome had changed. The streets were filled with new statues, of Hadrian, not Trajan. Temples bore different designs, domes had sprouted like fungi, and the theater of Marcellus now hosted poets who recited verses in Hadrian's honor. He was not welcomed publicly. There was no parade, no crowd to meet him at the gates. Only a discreet escort of guards who brought him not to his former villa, but to a guest house on the outskirts, surrounded by gardens and silence. Lucius stayed by his side, but he too sensed it, the watchfulness, the intentional forgetfulness. Messages sent to former allies went unanswered. Friends once loud in praise now kept their distance. You are being erased, Lucius murmured, as they stared out over the city from a quiet terrace. No, Apollodorus said. I am being remembered too well. The official summons arrived days later. A short scroll, marked by the seal of the urban prefect, not the emperor himself. Apollodorus of Damascus is to present himself for final consultation before the Imperial Commission for Architectural Integrity. His presence is required for clarifications on prior projects. No audience with Hadrian. No charges. Just bureaucracy with the scent of finality. At the hearing, held in a vaulted chamber beneath the Palatine Hill, Apollodorus faced a tribunal of architects and scribes. Some had once been his students. Now they sat with averted eyes and tight lips, delivering scripted questions. Why were certain arches in the Forum spaced so wide? Why had he criticized domes during the Greek commissions? Why had he insisted the Pantheon's original structure lacked foundation integrity? Every answer he gave was met with nods, but no response. The scribes wrote mechanically, never looking up. It was a performance. A ritual. By the end, the lead examiner offered a final note. Thank you for your contributions. Your name will remain in the archives. You are released from further duty to the empire. Released. Not honored. Not condemned. Simply released, like a dog no longer useful for the hunt. That evening, Apollodorus walked alone to the Forum, standing at the edge of his great plaza. The Basilica Ulpia stood tall, its bronze doors closed for the night. The columns still shone. His works had not decayed, but he had been exiled within the city itself. Lucius joined him at the steps. They mean to bury you while you still breathe, he said. Apollodorus looked up at the carvings, soldiers building, bridges rising, emperors planning. I don't need to live forever, he said softly. But this will. Lucius said nothing. He stood beside his friend as the night deepened, and the moon lit up the carvings with a silver glow. Rome, 123 AD. The seasons turned, but no imperial pardon came. No commissions, no consultations. Apollodorus's name began to vanish from conversation, first in the Senate, then among craftsmen. In the marble halls of learning, younger architects studied domes and curves, favoring the Greek revival Hadrian championed. Trajan's name, once etched into every public voice, now sounded faint, like a song out of season. Apollodorus walked the streets alone. He aged quickly now. His shoulders sagged. His hands, once steady as a compass, trembled in the morning. Yet his mind remained sharp, eyes scanning every corner of every building he passed. He still sketched, still calculated. Scrolls piled in his chambers, plans for aqueducts, forums, even a modest temple in Cappadocia that would never be built. Lucius brought him news from outside. Hadrian's villa expands again, he said one day. Now with a miniature Nile. Gardens in the Greek style. Statues of gods from every province. Apollodorus didn't look up from his parchment. You can build the world into your home, but you cannot rule memory. Lucius frowned. He's having you followed. The guards no longer hide it. Let them, Apollodorus said quietly. If Rome still has eyes for an old man, so be it. The end came not by sword, nor trial, but by command. One morning, before dawn, the guards returned. Quiet, professional. No violence. You are to accompany us, the captain said. To where? Instruction is sealed. Lucius tried to block the doorway. He's done nothing. Apollodorus touched his shoulder. It's all right. This was always where it led. He was led through back alleys, past sleeping streets, not toward the Senate or the Forum, but toward the Tiber's edge, where abandoned warehouses and broken arches slept like old bones. There, without ceremony, he was handed a final scroll. He read it once. Then looked to the guards. I'm to drink it? One of them, a younger man, looked away. Another, older, nodded once. The vial was small. Clear liquid. Bitter almond on the air. He took it in silence. He died as he had lived, without spectacle, but not without meaning. Lucius found his body hours later, already pale. In one hand, clenched loosely, was a scrap of parchment, a half-drawn bridge, elegant and impossible, spanning two craggy cliffs that would never exist. There was no funeral. No public mourning. Not even a plaque. His name was not spoken at court again. But in the Forum of Trajan, beneath the towering column he had designed, veterans still walked. Children still played beneath the arches. Merchants sold figs in the shadow of the basilica. And stone remembered what flesh had forgotten. Years passed. Then decades. Hadrian ruled for nearly 2 more, building temples, traveling the provinces, surrounding himself with beauty both Roman and Greek. But in the years after his death, it was not the domes of his villa or the echoing halls of his theaters that endured with the people. It was the Forum. The Column. The bridge across the Danube. Apollodorus's name returned. Quietly at first, spoken by stonemasons and students. Later, by scholars who studied the proportions of his basilicas and found them exact even centuries later. His writings, hidden, copied in Antioch, whispered between craftsmen, became sacred texts of engineering. Where Hadrian's designs cracked, Apollodorus's held. Where Hadrian's temples sank, Apollodorus's walls stood. He had not just built for emperors. He had built for time. In the libraries of Byzantium, monks preserved his name. In Renaissance Italy, Brunelleschi traced his drawings. In modern Rome, tourists now stand where he once walked, gazing up, necks craned, at the spiral of marble that winds toward heaven. No statue marks his grave. But the city itself is his monument. And in the voice of every stone that endures, Rome still whispers. Apollodorus built this.